There's two more players the Royals have shown interest in this offseason. Who are those players and what do we think about it? We'll tell you in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Well, the good news is there's more players to talk about that the Royals are interested in, and it's not just hypotheticals. It's not just us making up, player interest and us trying to create potential trades or free agent signings. Now we got a little bit more of something behind it. Now we have a little bit more smoke to it. And it comes from an article done by Annie Rogers of MLB.com. Does a great job covering the Royals. We always know that we'll give her praise for the story she puts out there, whether it be a feature piece or informational pieces just like this one. And it comes just a few days after it was reported that the Royals and Reds had discussed a trade involving Jonathan India and Brady Singer. Now, I want to address a little bit more of the Jonathan India Brady Singer deal based off what I was saying in yesterday's episode. If you missed any part of that, you can always check it out on, again, wherever you listen to your podcast. But one part I forgot to bring up in that episode was Nick Martinez accepting the qualifying offer from the Cincinnati Reds just north of $20 million. And that very well may have now killed any potential trade between the Reds and the Royals involving Brady Singer, because their rotation is all but filled out at this point. So they may have used Brady Singer as a backup piece. Hey, if Nick Martinez tests free agency, he wants more than we're willing to pay him. Brady Singer would be a good next option here, a plan B, if you will. And then the Royals might have been asking about Jonathan India. As for today, two more players were brought up in this newsletter done by Annie Rogers. And it was reported that the Royals are interested in Taylor Ward. If you've been listening long enough this offseason, you would know that Taylor Ward is really, to me, at the top of my list. I think Taylor Ward makes the most sense. I think they've had the longest interest in him compared to guys like Jonathan India and guys like Alec Bohm, who were also mentioned in this article. I just think Taylor Ward checks all the boxes. There's been multiple episodes that we've done that have indicated that. He's got the defensive flexibility. He is a leadoff hitter. He's got great data on him, both offensively and a little bit at some spots defensively. But I think he checks all the boxes the Royals are looking for a leadoff hitter. And he's on a bad baseball team and a baseball team that might be willing to unload him. I also said yesterday, I don't really know what direction the Angels are going, because you never really know what direction the Angels are going. They're adding players to their roster. It's also not guys that are going to significantly improve the team. I kind of see it as guys being brought in to have trade value by the deadline. Maybe they hang on to Taylor Ward until the trade deadline again, or maybe they try to move him right before or during the winter meetings. Again, I think Taylor Ward makes a lot of sense for Kansas City. And I think if you put him in a lineup that has Bobby Witt Jr., Vinny Pasquantino, Salvador Perez, and maybe another bat right behind him, that's only going to boost his numbers. I mean, everything about Taylor Ward I really like. I know the strikeout percentage has gone up a little bit in the last few years. The walk rate right around 9.5 to 10% in his career. That's about his average as well. So that is fine by me. You have a walk rate north of 9%. I think I can live with it. If you're down in the 4 to 5 to 6 range, the Royals have a lot of that, and they've put that at the leadoff position before. But Taylor Ward, as I said with Jonathan India, would be an upgrade at the leadoff position. The better thing about Taylor Ward is he fits to this team based off what he can do defensively. Jonathan India, a little bit more difficult, even though I said I'm not overly concerned about positions at this point in time. But for Taylor Ward, you could plug him into left field right now and you wouldn't have to do anything. Or you could put him in right field. He also can play the infield. And it was reported in that Athletic article done a few weeks ago, Katie Wu was one of the authors in it, that the Royals are looking for an upgraded version of Garrett Hampson, a right-handed bat that can play center field, shortstop, and second base. Not exactly what Taylor Ward does, but pretty damn close to what Taylor Ward does. Now, for the other player, Alec Bohm, that strikes me as a little bit more surprising because Alec Bohm didn't really get onto my radar until this article or this newsletter, if you will. I think Alec Bohm would fit fine in Kansas City. And I'm not saying that I didn't entertain the possibility, but I was certainly going to wait around to see if we heard anything or if something was written about Alec Bohm and the Royals had checked in. Now we have that evidence that the Royals, per sources, have checked in on Alec Bohm. What's also going to be a bolded thing here, a highlighted thing, an underlined thing, no deal is close right now. But the Royals are casting a wide net. They are checking in on a lot of different hitters. And one other piece I got from this newsletter that I thought was interesting was the difference for the Royals in going after somebody in free agency and going after somebody through trade. And in this newsletter, it's stated that, it's not ruling out the Royals are going after somebody in free agency, but they really like the options they could go out there and get via trade. They could still be spending money. Who really knows? Again, I think I said this either last week or maybe it was in yesterday's episode that there's a list of guys the front office has. It's not like they've got one or two guys and they're putting all the emphasis on them. There are the plan A's and there's the plan B's, the plan C's. That's the way it goes for everybody in Major League Baseball. You've got a lot of options to check in on. I just think it's interesting to note that the Royals are really trying to be aggressive through trade. And then I get to another article not too long ago. I actually read it a few hours ago where Jesse Rogers did this piece. And I read it on ESPN. And it was kind of taking a poll of a lot of MLB execs around the league. And when it gets to one of the bullet points or one of the questions of which small market team is going to have an active winter or the most active winter, the Royals were picked as the number one team to do so, or at least had the most votes. And this quote goes as such as soon as I can pull it right up again. In this piece, I'll put kind of the big quote here. I'll let you guys go out there and read on ESPN, but I paraphrased it, if you will, over on Twitter. But it said, quote, "Our panel predicts another active winner for the Royals front office that surprised many with its signings last offseason." Goes on to say in this big quote, "Voters who chose the Royals," and that's the execs that are voting, who chose the Royals here, were pretty confident that they'd make some noise after an unexpected postseason run. So now you have league execs, guys that have really been probably tuned into this, locked into this, maybe have been hearing from other execs. Maybe the Royals have been dealing directly with their team. But this has always been the feel that going back to last year, when the Royals want somebody, when they're targeting guys, they're going to be pretty aggressive when it comes to that. And I have always said that's what separates small market teams out there. The ones that are good, the ones that can put together winning seasons, give themselves an opportunity in the postseason, they jump on the market, whether it be the trade market or it be free agency. Last year, the Royals put an emphasis on going heavy in the free agent market. They didn't really have a lot of pieces to trade. Now maybe they feel like there are some pieces to trade, even at the big league level, that can better their offense. And I understand that these deals are not close. I also think there is something to read into it that we are a month, right? I think just under a month, a couple weeks since the World Series came to a conclusion. The Royals are already one of those teams that are being put out there, that are going after specific players. It's another thing, like when we read that article on The Athletic 2 weeks ago, or maybe you didn't. I know I did. But when you just say the Royals are looking for this, they are looking for a leadoff bat, they are looking for a middle of the order bat, I don't think that shows that you are anywhere close to some deal. When you start singling out players and it's being reported that trades have been discussed, I think there is something to absolutely take away from it. I think that there is more smoke, maybe, than is being let on right now. I mean, with JJ Picollo going from Brady Singer's a lock for the rotation, and they like the starting pitching depth, to discussing trades that involve Brady Singer and Alec Marsh and Chris Bubich, a lot of this can be a smokescreen. And sometimes when you hear, well, a trade's not really close, maybe it's closer than we think. And we're getting closer to the winter meeting, just a few weeks away. I've now gone from I'm going to be pretty surprised if a big deal is struck before the winter meetings. And now I'm sort of swinging on the side of I expect a move to be made before the winter meetings. And if it's not, I would fully expect a move to happen at the winter meetings. Some trade to occur in that week where a lot of trades will go down, a lot of signings will happen. I didn't think that it would be really ramping up until December. And the fact the Royals are already starting to heat up a little bit on the trade front, it makes me think that they're already trying to be aggressive and get out ahead of deals like this. So the Royals seem to be interested in 3 guys right now that have been named specifically. I'm sure there's a lot more. They're casting a wide net, but Jonathan India is being one, Taylor Ward being another, and former Wichita State shocker Alec Bohm, and first-round pick, top 5 pick at that. Jonathan India as well, a first-round pick himself. I can't remember if Taylor Ward was or not, but still a lot of talented guys out there, and clearly they view at least those 3 guys right now as potential pieces to upgrade that lineup. All right, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, Matt Quatraro did not win Manager of the Year over Stephen Vogt. He finished second and got 19 second-place votes, so not really a close one between Stephen Vogt, Matt Quatraro, and A.J. Hinch of the Detroit Tigers. What did we think about it? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor today and our title sponsor in Gametime. Couple of big local games coming up this weekend. You're going to have KU in Colorado at Arrowhead Stadium. K-State, if you're living in the western part of Kansas and you're still a Royals fan and checking in on us, we know that K-State's going to be at home against Cincinnati. That'll be their senior day as well. Senior day for KU, of course. And for Missouri fans out there, again, I'm just speaking locally. Maybe you're not even a fan of these 3 teams. That Missouri's going to be in Starkville against Mississippi State. Maybe you're thinking about going. And if you're thinking about buying tickets, do so over at Gametime, because we got a deal that we've been running for quite some time now. So here's what you need to do. Download the Gametime app and use our code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. What time is it? It is game time. Right before I did this podcast, I was watching MLB Network and the presentation of the Manager of the Year awards, and got to hear a little bit from Stephen Vogt, from Matt Quatraro, and from A.J. Hinch, all coming from the American League Central. And let me be very clear on this. I'm not going to sit around and really get too fired up about it, because also I don't think Matt Quatraro is going to be too fired up about it. I'm sure he would, deflect any sort of praise coming his way, even if he were to win the award. I still think he was deserving. And I know these 3 guys had great cases, right? I think I would be a little bit more disappointed if you had, one of the managers such as, I think Aaron Boone did a great job with the Yankees this year. He's also constantly criticized and, feeling the heat from the fan base because he's the manager of the Yankees. If he was a finalist and he won, you could make the case of, hey, he did win the American League. Well, you look at the roster that he had. With these 3 teams, they weren't loaded rosters, right? Cleveland didn't have a good rotation, best bullpen in baseball, a couple of great pieces offensively, but Stephen Vogt in his first year, one hell of a job. A.J. Hinch goes from a team that's selling at the deadline to a 31-13 record in the final 44 games of the year. I believe that was the stat I was reading on MLB Network. And Matt Quatraro goes from 56 and 106 to 86 and 76. That 30-win improvement was the sixth largest win improvement in the divisional era. I think it was the fourth best win improvement or largest win improvement in the American League during the divisional era. So, again, in many cases, I think Matt Quatraro runs away with that award. But as I said before the break, it wasn't really that close. And this was the Baseball Writers Association that's, voting on this. And Stephen Vogt, to me, I think he closed as the betting favorite over at FanDuel. So I didn't go in thinking that Matt Quatraro was going to run away with it. I knew it was going to be very close. And still, not a bad thing to finish second place for this award. It's also not the end-all, be-all. To me, that Manager of the Year award certainly deserves praise. It sounds very nice, but Skip Schumacher won Manager of the Year for the Miami Marlins in his first year and was fired the next. It can change that quickly. I think even Buck Showalter was joking about it a little bit of, this award can be a little bit of a curse. And, it's great to win it one of the years. And actually, as I'm doing this segment, Pat Murphy wins Manager of the Year for the Milwaukee Brewers. So Brewers get Exec of the Year and Manager of the Year for a couple of the awards. And we'll also be getting the Cy Young Award tomorrow and then the MVP on Thursday. And that should wrap up everything. I don't believe there's any more awards after that. I still think you have to feel fantastic about the direction of this ball club. And it's not just Matt Quatraro. Let me be very clear on that. And there are still things that, Matt Quatraro is going to be criticized for. I think in baseball, there's no perfect manager, right? There really is no perfect manager. You are going to watch 162 games of your favorite team, and there are going to be 20 to 30 games that you are just irate with what the manager did. What I decided to do this year was, after a move was made, kind of hear what was said in the post game. There's obviously reasons to why certain guys were in, why certain guys were playing. And after all, coaches, and it's not just in baseball, coaches, managers, they know the players better than we do, right? They're with them on a daily basis. And one of the things I was told in the middle part of the season, I thought was fascinating, and it was about Matt Quatraro, and it was, this is such a organized and prepared individual that, you may think that managers come to the game prepared, and they do. Let's be very clear about that. Managers don't just sit back and let everybody do stuff for them. But Matt Quatraro was a very driven, prepared, 5, 6, 7 steps ahead for certain matchups. Like, that's the type of guy that was in the dugout. And I think the more important part about this, more so than the award, the players really liked him. The players were gravitating toward him. The players liked that style. Whereas I think under Mike Matheny, it was a little bit more rigid. It was a little bit more intense. And, Matt Quatraro's personality is very calm. He doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. But, working in baseball before, I remember when I worked in independent league baseball, I was told, with managers, and especially the one that I was working for at the time, that he is the definition of not too high, not too low. And that team went on to win the championship that year. Just players like that in a manager. Knowing when there's X amount of months, X amount of games in the season, you got to understand that, one win, you can celebrate it, but don't act like it's the best win you've ever had. And even a bad loss, blowing an 8-run lead in the ninth, it sucks, but you got to get ready to go the next day. And that was something I loved about the 2024 Royals. They were able to flush things rather quickly. When they would lose a game that was tough and the fan base is up in arms, I remember so many times I could have 40 or 50 responses on a final tweet about a game. And the players had already flushed it. We're focused on the next day. And it did get difficult when this team went through a 7-game slide, I believe it was, in September with a playoff spot on the line. Don't get me wrong. That was stressful times. But anytime you take a 106-loss team to Game 4 of the American League Divisional Series in 1 year, I understand J.J. Picollo made moves, but he made moves that were tailored to the style of Matt Quatraro. And I think you give him a nod. I think you give Brian Sweeney, Zach Bove, the entire group in there, Keone Duran, Alec Zumwalt, Mitch Stetter. there are a lot of guys, Damon Hollins, Vance Wilson, that entire coaching staff was able to get the best out of a lot of guys there. And I think the professionalism that was in that clubhouse, at least from what I saw from time to time, um, that's why you should feel good about the direction. I'm not trying to be a mouthpiece or anything like that, because I understand, clearly in doing this podcast for the last year and a half, there are people that just don't like Matt Quatraro's style. They don't like how calm he is, his demeanor. They want him to be more fiery, fight for his players. I've just tried to always rebuttal with that fiery, intense, passionate style that Mike Matheny had didn't work. It didn't really resonate with the players. And what Matt Quatraro does with this bunch, it resonates with them. It works with them. And now I'm going to be fascinated to see, after an 86-win season, as we already discussed last week, it's much harder to improve on that than a 106-loss season. He absolutely was deserving to win the award, but so was Stephen Vogt, so was AJ Hinch. These were three great candidates, in my opinion. Again, the award, it's for the individual season. It doesn't mean you're the best manager in baseball. That's going to be given to guys that win the World Series over and over and over again, or get the most out of a lackluster roster. But still, I think Matt Quatraro earned his stripes this year. Second-year manager, was a finalist and finished second in the American League Manager of the Year vote. Stephen Vogt takes that trophy home and taking Cleveland to the number 2 seed in the American League side, won 90-plus games. Certainly a damn good year for Cleveland as well. And I'm sure Matt Quatraro is happy for a guy like Stephen Vogt. All right, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, 3 guys were added to the 40-man roster, which puts the Royals' 40-man roster at 37. Do we think that they picked the right guys? And were there any notable omissions? We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You're tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor today in FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports book partner of the NFL. And for my pick, I'm actually going to take the over on points for Hunter Dickinson tonight against UNC Wilmington. As I'm recording this right now, the game has not been played, still about an hour away. So hopefully it uploads by the time this goes out so that I can get that bet in over at FanDuel. Last thing we're going to dive into is the 40-man roster deadline that was today, and the Royals elected to add 3 guys to their 40-man roster. And I think with 2 of them made a lot of sense. The 3 were Noah Cameron. We've talked about him a handful of times in the last couple of weeks. And then you have Luander Avila, who had a great Arizona Fall League, starting to have more strikeout stuff, some plus stuff. Wouldn't be surprised to see him get to AAA in 2025. And then Eric Sarantola. I really like the stuff there. I think that that's going to play at the big league level, maybe even as a reliever. But those 3 guys, I think, were very safe bets, very safe picks. And if there was one that kind of surprised me, it was Chandler Champlain not being added to the 40-man roster, because he was just somebody that I thought would be viewed as a potential Rule 5 steal. And that's kind of the risk you're running here. I don't think the Rule 5 draft, though, is as obvious as they make it out to be. Sometimes guys are left off the list and, they're just passed over by multiple teams because either they're focused on bringing in free agents, they're trading for guys. But, Chandler Champlain is somebody that I'm going to be pretty surprised if he isn't picked up in the Rule 5 draft. In fact, this was put out there by Chris Clegg, some notable omissions. So this is why that an omission like Chandler Champlain is going to be, put on the radar by a lot of teams out there. teams that are struggling, teams that are looking to rebuild a little bit. And maybe the best way to address this before we get into some of these players, for those listening, maybe a first-time listener, or you're not as familiar with the Rule 5 draft or this deadline, today was the deadline to protect some guys on the 40-man roster. The Royals had spaces cleared up. They added those 3 I just mentioned. Therefore, you don't need to make a 40-man roster move if you are to add them to the 26-man roster at any point this year. I don't envision that happening with a guy like Avila. I don't even envision that happening with a guy like Sarantola. I do believe Noah Cameron's going to get to Kansas City at some point this year. So you wouldn't need to clear up a 40-man roster spot, then add him to the 26-man roster. He would be one of those pieces to just put on the 26-man roster if there was an injury or a guy got demoted. But as for the Rule 5, coming up here during the winter meetings, the guys that are not protected on the 40-man roster are free game. There's going to be a draft very similar to what the normal draft looks like, but teams can pass. I think there's 2 rounds now that I think about it. At least it used to be 2 rounds. So maybe I'm not doing the best job describing that. But teams will be able to take anybody that's not protected on the 40-man roster, but that player will then immediately go to the big league level, and they will have to stay there for the entire year. And if they don't, they have to send that player back. So Chris Clegg, I love following him on Twitter. He does great work and kind of breaking down some of the minor league talent out there. He's tweeted about the Royals a handful of times. So if you want to follow him at Chris Clegg, MILB, out there on Twitter, he listed these guys as notable omissions from today's deadline and are absolutely going to be Rule 5 targets on the first glance. So you got Ryan Webb of the Cleveland Guardians farm system, Chandler Champlain's number 2 on this list out of Kansas City. You have Austin Gauthier, I believe that's how you pronounce it, of the Dodgers, Cooper Bowman for Oakland, now just known as the Athletics, of course, because they just had their final year in Oakland. Eberson Castellano of Philadelphia, Kalai Rosario of the Twins, Dom Hamill of the Mets, and Mike Vasil of the Mets as well. I would always say that relievers, or starters for that matter, at the minor league level, are the hot commodity when it comes to the Rule 5 draft, because it's easier for a guy that's in high A or double A or triple A to make that jump as a reliever, as a starter. Brad Keller was a Rule 5 pick. They got him. It was actually the way they did it. He was in Arizona's system, and then I think he was picked up by somebody else, and the Royals made a trade in that Rule 5 draft and got Brad Keller and Burt Smith, for that matter, in the 2018 season. Joakim Soria was a Rule 5 pick. I think the last Rule 5 pick, now that I think about it, I'm already blanking on his name. He did not make it very far in the Royals organization, but Matt Sauer was the Rule 5 pick this past year. He wasn't there very long. I'm thinking of one guy before that that never had the best command. If you're knowing who I'm talking about, that's a very broad statement and a very general description of the guy. But I think a few years back, there was one Rule 5 pick that I was pretty high on in the Royals organization, and he just never was able to throw enough strikes at the minor league level. They had some loophole. That's the only reason I'm bringing him up, because the loophole of it is you put a guy on the injured list, not the 60-day, because that would remove him from the 40-man roster. You have him on the 15-day IL, and you just keep pushing it off. And then after the year, you'd be able to add him back to your roster. I remember in 2019, Elvis Luciano, a prospect of the Royals, had been picked up by Toronto. He was a 19-year-old and never pitched above high A. He goes to the big league level, never catches on. We've never heard from him since, but that's what can happen. You can be high on a young prospect, or at least guys that are eligible, that are in that 40-man roster situation. So you have to be, that's one thing I do need to maybe a little bit more descriptive on. Like, Blake Mitchell can't get picked up on the 40-man roster here. There's a certain amount of years that you have to be in the minor league level, but if you're not protected on that deadline, you are fair game. So that's why, some of the 40-man rosters of guys that were just drafted, Jack Caglione, Carter Jensen, guys like that, they're not needed to be added just yet. So you reach a certain amount of years at the minor league level, you either have to be added to the 40-man roster or you are fair game in the Rule 5 draft. And then if you're passed over, you just return back to that organization and you continue as is. But the Royals, they pick Luander Avila, they pick Eric Sarantola and Noah Cameron to the 40-man roster. now at 37. Chandler Champlain, though, seen as one of the notable omissions for Kansas City and will absolutely be a target in the Rule 5 draft. So we'll see if anybody from the Royals organization gets picked up in the Rule 5 draft here in a couple of weeks. But we do know that Noah Cameron, Luander Avila, and Eric Sarantola are all protected from that Rule 5 draft. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, might go over a little bit more of these rumors that are swirling around the Royals in their quest for finding a leadoff hitter and a middle-of-the-order bat. Might also be wondering about what starters could be out there if the Royals do elect to trade some of the depth they already have. But until tomorrow, you take it easy, Kansas City.